Hello and welcome to the Plate Spinning Academy podcast, hosted by me, Nick Davis, a productivity mentor and multi-passionate entrepreneur. I know what it feels like when you want to do all of the projects all at the same time, with never enough time and energy to do it all. I'm a passionate creative who's found my almost perfect blend of business and life that keeps my head motivated, my body energised and my heart happy. I'll be talking about all things to do with organisation, rotas, goal setting, systems and structures, and strategies for business and life together, all combined with a healthy dose of accountability and motivation to help you on your journey. It's time for you to find your tailored recipe for accomplishment and contentment. Hello and welcome to today's episode. I'm going to be discussing a little bit about time blocking, but where it can also fall down. You might already be familiar with time blocking, but if you are not, have a think back to your school timetable, what it looked like. There'd be set time slots each week for you to spend on lessons at a specific time on a specific day. And the school was in charge of organising this for you, and you'd have details on which classroom you were in and when, and if you were allowed to, you could colour it in, which made it a little bit easier to work with, and you'd refer to it until you had memorised it, until it was on autopilot, basically, which was probably just as well, because I think most of us lost it eventually after a few weeks. So we had to do it from memory. The problem is we're not at school anymore. And now, as business owners, we are overseeing our own time. We haven't got anybody to tell us where we should be or at what time. And perhaps if you've come out of quite a stressful corporate environment where you had meetings back to back and there were lots of things going on, you may feel some resistance to this. Particularly if one of the reasons you became self-employed was to maybe free yourself from the time constraints, or maybe you wanted to be flexible with your work or to mould it around your family or other commitments. The thing now is that you are your own boss and you're doing things what you want to do when you want to do them. And that's how it goes, yeah? So here's the problem. If you want to succeed in business, then the answer to that is no. You do also need to be disciplined with what you're doing and when. And this needs to form part of your business strategy. Looking at how much time you spend on tasks each week. And when you work from home, it is way too easy to become distracted. You wake up in the morning, you haven't got anything written down for today, you're not sure what you're doing. You start faffing about and before you know it, you've got nothing done. And then tomorrow you repeat the same thing because you've got no structure in place on how best to focus your time or your energy. So it got me thinking about long before I was in business. I was a stay-at-home mum in my 20s. I just had my second child and I was at home. There was no point in me going back to work because the childcare costs were just prohibitive, completely prohibitive. And I did want to spend time with my kids at home. You know, I wanted to be a full-time mum at that point. But I also needed other things to do. So I was lucky enough to get involved in some voluntary work that was set up in the local estate. It was a new community group. And I'm very grateful for it because I made a lot of friends and I gained a lot of valuable skills and experience. And those volunteer skills have actually helped me throughout my entire life. So unfortunately, I had postnatal depression with my firstborn and I really did struggle to get through each day. So when baby number 2 arrived, I did absolutely everything I could to make sure that postnatal depression didn't come back. I did still get postnatal depression, but this time around, I found better ways of coping. When I first became a mum, when I was a lot younger, I had almost no support network. I was a single mum at 19, and most of my friends were off out to the pub, and I just simply couldn't join them. I lost a lot of my friends at that point. I had no structure to my day. And I really did find myself struggling mentally to make it to bedtime each night. When I had my second child, I worked harder to build a support network around me and a structure as well. I made sure I was out and about on a regular basis. I was seeing people regularly for social visits and community work. And there were meetings. There was some fantastic networking days, and there was all sorts of events going on. And I thoroughly enjoyed that time of my life. It was great. And I kept myself physically fit. I walked everywhere. I was out with the buggy all the time. One of the things I would do is I'd walk to the local leisure centre, and they had one free creche session a week, which I made the most of. So I'd put my youngest into the creche for an hour, and I would go and swim for an hour, and it was great. And then I'd walk back. And I keep that going on at the same day. I think it was a Wednesday morning I used to go, and it was at the same day every week, and it was at the same time. So I ended up having to kind of make sure that I remembered. So everything that I did at that time was planned out. And believe me, I was actually really busy. For somebody who wasn't in employment, I kept myself extremely busy with looking after the kids, but also looking after myself as well. Also, I thought. At some point, I realised I was actually doing an awful lot and I needed to get really organised. And this was before we had what we now know as the computers on the desks at home. We were just before that. I think it was about 1997, 98. I don't think we had a computer at home at that point. So everything was still pen and paper. But I realised I needed to get organised. So I drew myself out a timetable for the week on a piece of paper. And I'd write in all the school runs. I'd write in when I went swimming, all the community meetings that I was doing. And when I was meeting friends for a brew. And then I'd take it to when I was making tea. And I think I even wrote down what TV programs I was watching. I became kind of super organised with my time, and I needed to know what I was doing and when. And I realised now I was time blocking before time blocking became a thing. I stayed on top of keeping the house straight. I enjoyed renovating the garden, looking after the kids and all my community work. Life was balanced. I thought it was balanced. And here was the problem. Because I was so scared of my postnatal depression coming back, if I saw a gap in my day, even one, I'd fill it. I just couldn't cope with not doing anything. I feared having that depression come back, get worse, and thought if I stopped to pause, it'd hit me again and I would be back in that pit of despair. And I was prepared to do anything to make sure that I didn't go back there. So I kept myself busy and I made sure that I filled every single minute of my day. And my timetable, my time blocking that I'd written out was a visual representation of that. And I was happy that it was full. And what I didn't do at the time was that I didn't factor in my breathing space. So I'm kind of looking back now, kind of 25 years later, I created the habit of being busy. And at the time, I didn't feel like it was a problem. But a few years later, juggling a really difficult job as well as everything else, I was doing the same thing. I was cramming too much into my week. And I actually burnt out for the first time. And I paid a really heavy price for this. This was around 2003. I had a really good job, but I was also studying. I was looking after the kids. You know, superwoman thinking she can do it all. And I ended up with a bad virus that I didn't recover from for quite a while. And I ended up with chronic fatigue. And I had to give up my job. And spent 4 years resting on the sofa watching the world go by. And it was a pretty horrific time. And guess what? I got depression again. So by trying to avoid depression, I put my physical health at risk. And I still got depression because my body wouldn't work properly. I mean, there were some other contributing factors at the time. Main one was that I was not looking out for myself. So if you just take that one story as a kind of warning, what we need to do when we are blocking out time for the week is always have these buffer times between any tasks that we're doing. Having that structure in place is fantastic. but we need to make sure that we're leaving gaps here and there. When you're booking in calls, don't make them back to back. You've got to leave in some buffer time. I'm lucky now that I live semi-rural, and quite often now I will just take myself off, make a brew, go and sit in the garden and watch all the birds, because with the wildlife we've got is amazing. And I didn't think I'd be doing that, but that is part of my time out that I am building in to my everyday. I'm making that habit. I'm no longer busy. I'm now looking to see, where can I put my rest time in? And this, having to change my mindset on what rest actually is. Rest is productive, because if I'm not resting, then I can't do what I'm expected to do later on in the day, or I can't do what I'm expected to do tomorrow. So what I do now is, obviously we've got digital calendars now. I have my Google Calendar, and one of the first things that I do when I'm planning out my week or my month is I put in my rest time first, and everything else has to work around that. Maybe that's something for you to think about when you're putting your calendar together or your planner together. What's going in there first? We need to be ring fencing our time, our self-care time, our rest time. And I always put these in a bright green. Everything else I have a various colour method for everything, depending on whether it's an online meeting or an in-person meeting. But the time that fills my cup back up, whether that's rest or just taking time out or self-care, or maybe even meeting somebody for a coffee, because that is also what I consider productive rest. I always put those in green, because it's green for go, and it's green for good, and it's green for healthy. And that is absolutely needs to be our priority before we put anything else in our calendars at all. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Come and find me on socials. I've got a couple of free groups you can find on my profile that you are welcome to join. I'd love to hear more about what you'd like me to talk about on the podcast, and I would welcome your ideas for future episodes.